Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Pascal Marie Bryan, and I will be moderating a panel of distinguished experts on payments. We will be talking about what you do every day, with pleasure, possibly, i.e. pay. But, you know, the pandemic we all go through has changed dramatically the way we pay. We pay a lot on e-commerce, much more than going to shops, and we pay contactless. So things have changed dramatically. And the first question I could ask my panelists, after having asked them to introduce themselves, is the way things will continue in the coming years. So could you please introduce yourself very shortly, starting with Pilar?
Hello, my name is Pilar Claveria. I'm payments advisor at the Spanish Banking Association for a while, with previous experience in IT departments and operations departments related to payments.
Thank you. Javier?
Good afternoon, Pascal. Very pleased to be with you, and I thank you, the organizer, for inviting me. Well, after a career in banking, with a period devoted to consulting and another one with the public administrations, since 5 years ago, I am an independent professional, and as such, I am chairing the European Payments Council, who is the body in charge of managing the SEPA payment schemes. I am chairing also Iberpay, who is the company in charge of managing the Spanish payment system. And I am as well a director with the Global Legal Entity Identifier Foundation, based in Basel, in Switzerland. And finally, I am also a director at the supervisory board of the Western Union International Bank, based in Vienna, Austria. So different roles, very much still close to the world of payments and identity, and happy to be here.
Thank you very much. Very impressive, Javier. What about you, Roland?
So first of all, thank you for the invitation, and happy to be on this panel with these distinguished co-panelists. My name is Roland van der Sappen, and I'm the head of regulatory affairs for Visa in Europe. So I look after EU policy issues.
Thank you, Roland. And last but not least, Etzisen?
My name is Estisen Gregorio, and I work at the Public Affairs and Media Relation at AUCU, Spanish Consumer Association, who is also member of Euroconsumers, organizing the event today. I work leading campaigns and leading European project funded projects, and also as a spokesperson for the organization.
Thank you very, very much. So let's go back to our subject of today, payments. Could I ask each of you first whether the trends we have seen because of COVID will last in the coming years? And should we, for example, decide that or propose that merchants always have to accept an electronic means of payment so that we don't use cash, we don't touch cash? And, we could limit the pandemic, this one and the ones to come. Who wants to ask to answer first? Pilar, maybe?
Thank you, Pascal. I think there are a lot of questions in one. Let's go one by one, if I remember all of them. Yes, I think that the pandemic has, as you said, changed a lot the behaviors or the habits, I would say habits of consumers when paying. And I definitively think that will last. One of the most difficult things is to change habits, and now that has happened, and that will last. I think the pandemic has given the opportunity to consumers to discover these alternative payment methods that are secure and convenient. And I think for daily payments, convenience is one of the key elements in order to consumers to make the choice. Coming back to that need to make the obligatory acceptance of electronic payments, instead I would say that what we need to obtain, what we need to look for is that the consumers can definitively make the choice whenever they make a payment. Of course, that means that electronic payment should be accepted as much as cash is accepted. Consumers should, of course, be confident that alternative payments, electronic payments are going to be accepted. And then it's up to them whether to be cashless or to remain cash-based for their daily payments.
Thank you, Pilar. Very interesting. What's your view from Visa, Roland?
I think, first of all, I would also agree with Pilar. I think that the shift in consumer behavior is permanent. There's a clear increase in adoption of digital payments and increased preference for digital payments, and would also agree that consumers should have the choice to pay digitally if they wish. We have seen some countries, thinking about Portugal or Belgium, having proposed mandatory digital payment acceptance laws for retailers, and that often means that they have to offer one digital payment option that may not always be the one used by or preferred to be used by the consumer. There are other countries that have gone down a different route, proposing more incentives for merchants to accept the digital payments, and then often multiple different digital payment methods. I think from a Visa perspective, as I said before, we want consumers to have choice. And if there would be any regulatory action taken by governments, we would prefer to go down the route of giving people the incentives to accept digital payments.
Thank you, Roland. What about a European view, Javier?
Well, in principle, I would say that I don't like obligations, because obligations lead to frictions, frictions lead to costs, and costs lead to inconvenience. So the fewer the obligations, the better, I would say. What we should pursue is that we have a level playing field for all payment instruments. So there are no difference or no material differences in the usage both payers and payee can do with them. So it's more having them on equal grounds in regulatory terms. So that, I would say, would be the goal to pursue. And now that you talk about trends, I think it may be of interest for consumers and for businesses as well to realize how remarkably well electronic payment instruments and payment systems have reacted to the last two crises, the financial crisis since 2018 and the last pandemic, in which electronic means of payments have, if anything, helped businesses and consumers in their daily life, in their activities, and in overcoming the difficulties created by these two crises. So they have shown to be resilient, flexible, convenient. They have shown continuity, and they have responded very well to the new needs and requirements from users. So that's something that we should realize many times, because they are silent. We don't become aware of the fact that they are working, and they are working, in my view, in an outstanding way.
Let's listen. Lastly, what's your view from a consumer point of view? When going to shop, should we continue using cash, or should we? What's your view?
Well, the pandemic definitely changed the way consumers pay. In our recent survey, we realized that up to 49% of consumers have increased the use of instant payments, and up to 37% increased the use of debit card. So that made already a change. They are changing the way they are paying. What we think is that they should be able to pay the way they choose, as the different payment methods should be available and not to be mandatory, because in countries like Spain, cash is something that consumers are really used to it. So we don't think one method of payment should be mandatory over other ones, but to have the possibility of choose all of them. What we need to create among different stakeholders is the confidence for consumers to be able to use the different more digital payments, like not to have insecurities or doubts about the security, but to create a really confident environment for them to choose the different ones.
Thank you. Then I have a provocative question. Contactless limit is at 50 euros today. Should we bring it to a higher level, like, I don't know, 120 euros, or should we keep it for security reasons at 50 euros? What do you think for the Spanish market, Pilar?
I must say that for the Spanish market, there is no limit for contactless. Any amount can be paid with contactless functionality. What we can discuss in Spain is whether it has to be PIN present or not PIN present, because that is what makes the difference. But for the customer's perspective, for whenever they use a car with the contactless functionality, a car or a mobile, sometimes the limit, the PIN is present. Sometimes it depends on the amount, sometimes it depends on how many times they have not paid without PIN. So if we consider that in Spain, around 80% of the card transactions are not requiring the PIN, honestly, I don't think we really need to make any modification on the limit. Because, as I say, for the contactless experience, the customer is always allowed to use it. And the only difference is that sometimes the PIN is requested. And now they perceive that as a security measure. So whenever they, from time to time, are asked to introduce the PIN, it gives confidence. And coming back to Esti's comment, it gives confidence to the customer whenever they use their contactless card, because if whatever happens, they know that from time to time the car is being controlled. So definitively in Spain, I don't think we need to modify the limits.
What about Visa? I think I've heard some people talking about Visa being favorable to increasing the contactless limit without confidential code, without the PIN. What's your view, Roland?
So first of all, we believe that the increase in contactless limits has been a success because we have seen a material change in consumer behavior. There is trust for contactless transactions, and contactless has become the norm. That's also because the fraud rates for contactless are the lowest of any card transactions. From our consumer research, we still see there is a majority of consumers that would welcome a further increase of contactless limits from 50 to 100 euro, because that would, for example, allow them to pay contactless with their card for their weekly shopping in the grocery market or family dinner, or even think about if you're paying at a gasoline station. But we also think that any increase in contactless limits need to go together with consumer choice, because some consumers may not feel comfortable to raise contactless limits further. And we've also seen in the UK, which recently increased the contactless limit, that banks have allowed consumers to lower contactless limits if in case they feel comfortable to do so. So from our perspective, we would like to give the option for higher limits, but for those who don't, they have the choice to choose differently.
Very interesting. What about the European perspective? Could we consider going to 100 euros? What's your view, Javier?
We at EBC don't have a view on this, because I think this belongs to the remit of the solutions owners rather than the scheme manager. We are a scheme manager. But what I could say, and I agree with my colleagues, is that in the realm of a solution, and be it a contactless solution, I think attention must be paid to two different dimensions. First, how to educate users, and I mean consumers and merchants at the same time, on how to use the instrument in the best possible way. Second, solution owners should develop tools to prevent fraud, and that as well something that everybody would understand. as scheme managers, we have little to add. So, but if anything, and I think in this we could agree with solution owners, is that we have to respond to market needs and requirements, and that do it in an agile way. For instance, in the SET Inst, we have a limit from the scheme perspective up to 100,000 euros. This was raised a year and a half ago from 15,000. So it was a significant increase. And next year we will think of raising it. This is not the user's limit, this is the scheme limit, different. But in any case, it shows that that we must adapt to the requirements that the market are showing and are requesting from solution owners, scheme managers, to define and to adapt, be it a solution, be it a scheme, whatever, to the real needs and requirements from the market.
Thank you, Javier. Ed Sisson, what's the consumer viewpoint on increasing the contactless limit without any confidential code or PIN code being entered? What's your view on that?
Consumers organizations, we are focusing on safety first always when we are talking about payments or any other issue related to consumers. But we saw is that the consumer accepted this kind of different methods and security measures, like for example, with the strong consumer authentication for payments up to 50 euro. We realized that almost 70% of the consumers thought the application was correct. They agree with it, and they even agreed more on payments over 50 euro. So that means that what we could say that they feel more confident when they've got these kind of measures, when they are using different payment methods, than to raise it. Of course, both banks and consumers organizations, we want the transactions to be as frictionless as possible. I mean, we want consumers to have easy ways for payment, but we want them to be sure, not only the transactions, but the consumers when they are doing it. So we don't think the raising the limit will be such, the adequate activity right now.
Susan, thank you very much. It's interesting. So we are not yet at a time we can draw a conclusion of, whether we want to increase the limit of 50 euros or not. But turning to something you mentioned a few minutes ago, instant payment. Instant payment will probably be made mandatory by the European Commission in the coming months. So it will bring lots of opportunities for a lot of people. We will be able to move money from person to person, or pay our hairdresser or plumber. And there are many ways in paying. And I think in Spain, we have a wonderful scheme called Bizum. I hope I pronounce it properly. And I would invite Pilar to explain what Bizum is all about. Thank you, Pilar.
I'm sure that the audience knows about Bizum, but if I had to explain what Bizum is to other audience not familiarized with it, I would say that Bizum is a way to make payments in a safe manner, quick and easy. And altogether, in one word, I would say it is convenient. The most successful recently launched payment service, I can say, at least in the Spanish community, it has been conceived for the consumers, and that is the reason of the success for this new scheme, if we want to call it. And it is designed specifically for each different use case. That is also another key of the good acceptance that Bizum is having. All that is included within the brand, Bizum. It is the onomatopoeic sound for speed, zoom, at least in Spanish. And the B gives the idea of the two ends of the transaction. So if we say Bitsum, it's something that happens from end to end very quick. And it is because on the base of that, there is the what we call the SCT Inst, the instant credit transfer. And as you say, it's in a matter of seconds. What we have currently available, the use cases that are available in the market are the P2P. So any individual can pay instantly to another person. We have also a use case for e-commerce that has been very successfully launched, and it is up and running, and more merchants are adhering to this solution to offer their customers the possibility to pay within the web, within the e-commerce sites with Bitsum. It is still incipient, but it's starting now in physical shops. So probably in the future, we will see more Bitsum labels in the shops. It is also available for sending money to NGOs. That was a very required thing, or it came really to solve a solution in the Spanish market, which is quite reactive when there are any catastrophe or whatever for any caritative purpose. We have solved with Bitsum something that we had in the market not solved, on how to move money very quick whenever there is a need for any eventuality. As I say, each use case has a different customer journey that is carefully analyzed, and it is designed accordingly. That is why it is so convenient for users. The common element is the underlying transaction. As I say, it's an instant payment over which Bitsum defines and builds the value-added service to offer the better or the best customer experience that can have been thought for that particular case. For that, there is a common element, which is the use of the telephone number or other element. It could be an email as an alias to be used instead of the IBAN. Who knows the IBAN? Who wants to provide up to 24 in Spain or 30 in other countries, numbers that don't even know by heart? But imagine to tape that on a mobile, which is now a very common element to make payments. So focusing on convenience, that was that first element, which is the core of the whole Bitsum solutions, which is that possibility to change and use the telephone number instead of the IBAN. Because whenever you have to pay someone, you know the telephone number. If it is a friend or in a shop, telephone numbers are all around. But if you have to ask for the IBAN, get the IBAN, don't get confused with all those figures and so on and so on. So that is the very core element on which all Bitsum solutions are built. But also, as I said, for each use case, the steps that have to be taken to execute the transaction are defined, always with the customer in mind. So to define the best possible way to do it. And that has an element which is, I think, key for Bitsum users as well, is that they perceive a common experience, and this common experience helps to create habits for the users. And habits are very difficult to break and to change and to modify. We have said that the pandemic has helped to that, and now we can help that those common experiences are helping to create the new habits for the users. So as a very easy additional service, there is also the availability the confirmation to the payee, which is also a key element for the consumer. So whenever two people are sending payments, each one wants to know that the payment is being received. And whenever someone is paying in a shop, the merchant wants to know that the money, that it is getting the money, so we can provide the service or the goods or whatever. So as a result, what we have with Bitsum is more than 18 million users, Bitsumers we call them, and that is around 0.5% of the Spanish adult population. So I think it's it's definitively very convenient for users.
But actually, at European level, what we have heard is that there aren't enough accounts that can be reachable, so that you may have a friend whom you can send money to and another friend coming from another country, and his or her bank is not part of the instant payment scheme. Javier, should we agree with the Commission that instant payments should be made mandatory for all banks to accept in Europe? Or do you believe that the market can grow progressively to an acceptable level? What would you prefer?
Well, I'm definitely a market believer, and I think precisely the Commission has misinterpreted the facts. Let me say, or at least refer to some of them. First, it's like more than 60% of all European institutions have a DIR, and more than 70% of those in the euro area. Those who have not a DIR are small banks, niche banks, and curiously, central banks. But maybe for very good reasons, and I wouldn't criticize them. If you look into who have actually a DIR, we can see that these are the big banks, the ones that really have the market shares in their books. And it's a personal estimation, but I think that more than 90% of payment accounts are reachable one way or the other nowadays. So it is not adherence the problem. So by making it mandatory, things wouldn't change. The obstacles are of a different nature. Of course, we have to increase reachability and improve that aspect. And there is an effort being made by the European Central Bank with the TIPS initiative to deploy connectivity through that system that will start being in place by mid-December next month. So it's in less than 3 weeks or so. That will allow much better reachability and connectivity in between the different accounts. There are also other obstacles in the point of interaction. For instance, many rules are, I would say, in detriment of the use of instant payments. For instance, it's a very good example, sanctions screening. This is an impediment to the extension of the usage of SCT Inst, and there are some other rules. So my personal advice would be that we address those specific obstacles which have been identified and leave the market progress. Now in November, we celebrate the 4th anniversary of the SCT Inst. So it has been living for 4 years. Mind you that it took 6.5 years for the regular SCT to fully migrate in the euro area, and 8.5 years in the non-euro area. So what we have witnessed with the SCT is a even more rapid development of the scheme and the usage. Today, we have more than 10%, 10.35% of all credit transfers in Europe being made through the SCT Inst, so in an instant way. And that means, to be precise, that 99% of those transactions are below 5 seconds. So, and the average is very close to 2 seconds. So this is really immediate. So with those figures in mind, I would say, well, this has been a success. Of course, there are obstacles. Of course, we have to improve connectivity. Of course, we have to deploy more solutions. The European Payment Initiative may be a good example when it becomes a reality, and allow banks and other actors to digest the changes involved and the investments required to deploy SCT Inst. But the adherence, in my view, in my very personal view, is not a problem. And therefore, by making it obligatory to adhere for PSPs, for payment services providers, that will not solve almost anything.
Thank you, Javier. Roland, with development like Bitsum, cards are dead, right? People will start using mobile and will forget the cards in their wallets. What's your view on that?
I think first of all, I would say it's not a cards versus mobile, because you will also see many mobile transactions that tend to be card based. And going to the topic of instant payments that Javier and Pilar just talked about, for us it's also about choice. I think we believe instant payments should be part of a digital payment mix and will be a growing part of it, but consumers' needs and merchants' needs, what we are focused on as Visa, very much depends on the use case. And we see that the level, for example, of consumer protection is different between payments instruments for often for a good reason. Like I would be very happy if I get my refund for the airline tickets I bought with my credit card, or I'm sure to have the protection, of course, when shopping online, but I may not need the same level of protection when I buy a cup of coffee in the shop. So we also believe that the level of protection will be a factor that will determine a choice of a payment instrument by a consumer. But it's important that consumers are aware of the differences. I think when we talk about instant payments, I also think that maybe consumers may not always appreciate what instant payments mean, because essentially it's instant settlement of funds, meaning the money goes from your account right away. And while that is an important feature and one that might be preferred in certain cases, it definitely P2P transfers is only one feature that is important. We also think that the speed of authentication is as important, maybe even more in certain use cases. Think about using your card for the metro. A card may get authorized within 3 milliseconds or 5 milliseconds. Your instant credit transfer gets authorized between 3 or 5 seconds. So that's a difference in terms of queue behind me if you would have a different reality. So I think we need to understand that consumer choices will depend on the circumstances. And turning to your other question that you posed earlier to other panelists about what should regulators do? Should they make instant payments the new normal? I agree with Javier that we also prefer a market-driven approach, but because that's the one that guarantees choice most, it's the one that's closest to consumer and merchant needs. But that doesn't mean that regulators do not have a role to play. They need to address proven market failures, and that could potentially include adherence to SCT Inst, but that's one to be proven. And that we also think it's important to focus on security of payments, because consumer protection to some extent I think will vary across payment methods, but security is the bedrock for all payment instruments. And there we also believe that with respect to instant payments, because that's still to some extent being developed, a lot of focus needs to be on instant payment fraud prevention. Because maybe to give one statistic, in the UK, which is a bit more advanced, instant payment fraud last year was higher than that of cards, even though card volumes are higher than instant payment fraud. So it just shows that there is a need for industry and regulators to work together on that, so that then also the uptake of instant payments increases.
Thank you, Roland. Now turning to the consumers, I guess this this issue of security and fraud is absolutely important to have a major adoption of instant payment. What's your view? Because indeed, cards offer a tremendous protection that instant does not necessarily offer at this point in time. So, Etienne, what's your view on all this? Thank you.
Well, security is crucial for consumers and consumer organizations. That's something that we always have to keep in mind. We want consumers to have easy access for this kind of payments. Bizum has been incredible tool for this time. I mean, we were checking on the surveys, and up to 63% of consumers have used it in the last 12 months. That's a huge number for a country in which we are not like this digital native, and where we have lots of consumers that are suddenly driven to the digital market, let's say, without the proper information or digital education. So that's something that we always have to keep in mind. At the same time, when we are talking about instant payment methods, have to focus on the view of consumers, in which sometimes they with a single payment method, they might have or encounter different authentication behaviors. So that's what makes them a bit confused about this kind of payment, because for the same payment methods, they might encounter different situations with the different stores or platforms. So that's something that should tackle to get consumers informed, to make it easier for them and less confused. But what we saw is that these kind of payments, the instant payment methods, it's something useful for them, as long as their transactions are safe and secure.
Yes, indeed. Having safe and secure methods of payments, the way cards have been over the last decades, is absolutely essential for maintaining this adoption. And Bizum is really an example of a great success, because, as Pilar said, it was designed for people and not sort of a top-down approach where banks decide for the customers, but the banks took really the customer's interest into account. But bringing this further, we are thinking about open banking, and open banking will offer new horizons when it comes to payments, because today we just pay. Tomorrow we will be able to make use of our data to get additional services. And there is a project going on at European level, and I will forget about the acronym, it's just unpronounceable. But I would invite Javier to present a few customer journey things that people can't do today, but will be able to do if open banking was adopted at European level. Can you walk us through a few customer journey, please? Thank you.
Well, that's a pretty hard question to answer and to provide examples, and because we hope we will have those examples in place, but we still probably need some time to design them. But let me try to explain the situation to the audience, which might not be familiar with the current status. So I must start from the very beginning. We have two kinds of players in this game, which are the what so-called account servicers or account servicing payment service providers, but think of banks holding information and holding transactions in the benefit of the customers. And then on the other end, we have what we call the third-party providers, but think about fintechs, the ones that could use those transactions and information to provide new services. The Payment Service Directive 2, the revised directive, focused on two very specific cases: payment initiation on the one hand, and account information, gathering and management of account information on the other hand. And it was not really successful because both banks and fintechs were not happy with how the ground was left after regulation and after all the explanation by the European Banking Authority. So, and it was very limited. So what we are now working on is in the development of a scheme, and I know that the scheme may seem a confusing concept for consumers because we have schemes, we have instruments, we have arrangements, and nobody knows what we are talking about. But let me say that it is an agreement in between those two players, the account servicers and the fintechs, and they agree on innovative ways to use those transactions and information. So they are developing new ways, and fintechs in that, I think they excel. So we can find new innovation opportunities. We can also provide new client experiences, which is what fintechs would like to give their customers. And in doing that, what we find is that there are new sources of income, and this shouldn't repel us. So it is somehow magic that we can find new ways of creating income, because that means that we are creating value for which some people, consumers and businesses, will willingly pay. Now, if we create value, we have to find avenues in which this value is shared in a fair way, together with risks. There are values and there are risks, and they have to be shared in a fair way. So we need to bring together those two kinds of players, banks and fintechs, to decide how this world of transactions and information will be accessed so that consumers can enjoy new value, new propositions, and banks are rewarded if they deserve so. Why do we need this scheme, this agreement, which is taking so much time to develop? Well, because we need to devise ways to create commercial incentives so that there is a purpose of this whole exercise. And we need also to have a common roadmap and guidelines on how to work. So that, I think, is the main issues. And of course, in doing that, we need to put in place the right governance. And for that, I must say that consumers are very much welcome also in the designing table. So they are now working in the relevant multi-stakeholder working group. So everybody is now taking part in this test, in this designing exercise, and hopefully we will come with a solution so that fintechs can put in place these new innovative ways of creating value to consumers.
Thank you, Javier. Actually, talking about customer experience when it comes to open banking, one could think of having a credit at the time you buy a car. At that moment, you need for a credit. You go for a more expensive car and you go for a credit. Pilar, what's your view on all these new services?
Well, once again, it's a matter of consumer choice. So what we are building up now is a lot of elements that will be available for better services, better conditions, and it is the consumer that have to choose whether to share that information that can drive to a better conditions of a commercial offer, or whether they want to share information with third parties for any other purposes, or whether they want to have aggregated information of many other origins, so many different origins. So again, it's a matter of convenience for the consumer, but there is a need for the consumers also to be aware of what they are doing. What we can say is that the process of transferring or moving this data is absolutely secure, and there is no reason to worry about. And the consumer has to do things consciously. I mean, they need to be aware of whether they want to share a lot of information, very little, whether they do not care and they want to take profit of this exchange of information for other purposes. That's all.
Thank you, Pilar. Roland, how is it with at Visa? How do you envisage these new services offered by open banking?
So from a Visa perspective, we believe that open banking will create more tailored and improved financial services for consumers. And you already mentioned the idea of having improved individual credit scoring. I think that's one example use case that we would be interested in as Visa. And we also believe that the uptake of open banking services to date has been lacking because consumers do not always have trust in those fintech players and in sharing the data needed to obtain those services. And so that's something we are interested to step in as Visa by, for example, by developing what we call consent management specification criteria, because often those fintech players, they may obtain consumer consent in different ways. And once you establish some uniformity there, you also allow consumers to have an overview with who they share data, what data they share, and how to change that at all times. So that's pretty much our vision, to allow consumers to have more control over the data more and to benefit from more specialized services.
Thank you, Roland. And last but not least, how do consumers perceive the benefits or the risks of open banking and the opportunities it offers?
Open banking facilitates the management of different accounts from a single point of access. So that's something really useful for consumers. Everything that helps consumers to gain more information and control over their accounts, their movements, their balances is useful. As long as their security and privacy, it's always secure and they are aware of the consents that they are giving to the different stakeholders involved. And because they know that they have to, let's say, share those credentials for every single bank or access. So as long as the consumer knows which kind of consents they are giving, when they can revoke those consents, or how they can manage, that's something useful as it's the control and the overview of the different movements and balance.
Thank you very, very much for all these insights. And for our audience, I hope you're excited about the new developments and the new services that will come to market. And you see, we all work very hard to get them as secure, as fun as possible. And I think you will see very, very soon new services offered to you. And now it's time to close this panel. And thank you all for having taken the time to join this panel. And we hope this conference a lot of success. Bye-bye.